How about this for a number? Just 17% of the public think that this Labour government are doing...
I hold my hands up. I am. So I try and not lecture people.
History suggests the latter rarely ends well for politicians who forget who put them in power in the first place. 177% of the public believe Labour isn't doing a good job. That's the staggering statistic Ricky Gervais highlighted when reacting to Kier Starmer's meltdown over recent protests. These aren't just numbers. They represent real people feeling genuine betrayal. Pensioners marching in the streets, students staging walkouts, and traditional Labour strongholds turning against their own party.
I remember people were going, how dare he say those things to these most wonderful people in the world, these most privileged, handsome, lovely, multi-millionaires. And by the last one, people were going, give it to them, we're sick of them. I mean, you know, in the news now, you know, with these parties that the government, the people in charge were breaking the rules, having these parties in their lovely gardens. I think I've been naive.
When a comedian like Gervais becomes the voice of reason in British politics, you know something has gone seriously wrong. And what he says next about Starmer's priorities will make your blood boil. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. When a comedian becomes your most trusted political analyst, you know British politics has reached rock bottom. But that's exactly what's happening with Ricky Gervais, whose razor-sharp wit has turned toward the political landscape with surprising accuracy.
Just everything's up in the air. You can't look forward to anything. I can't put gigs in. I finished my tour just in the nick of time. Apart from the pandemic and the devastation and the deaths and the strain on the health service and people losing their livelihoods and that, the worst thing is the in charge. And because the people in charge, the posh, privileged people in charge, were acting like Charlie Sheen. I mean, really rubbing salt in the wound.
The creator of The Office and Afterlife is now dissecting Kier Starmer's government with the same precision he uses to dismantle Hollywood pretension. Gervais' unexpected pivot to political commentary isn't some calculated career move. It's born from genuine frustration with a government that promised change but delivered disappointment. His recent social media posts have gained massive traction precisely because they articulate what millions of Britons are thinking, but politicians refuse to acknowledge. I reckon about 177% of the public think Labour is failing, Gervais quipped on X last week. The comedic exaggeration lands because it captures the overwhelming sense of betrayal.
Only since Saturday to 1,378. On Sunday, a record for the year in a single day, 592 came across. 210 migrants crossed the channel illegally yesterday. That brings the total since Saturday
sweeping through Britain. What makes his observation particularly potent is how it strips away political jargon to expose the emotional reality. Voters feel deceived. The comedian didn't stop there. In a follow-up post that went viral within hours, Gervais asked the question, haunting British politics. Were they all lying all along? This simple query cuts to the heart of democratic accountability. Starmer campaigned on promises of integrity and transparency, positioning himself as the ethical alternative to conservative chaos. Now, just months into his premiership, those promises appear increasingly hollow. Perhaps most damning is Gervais' commentary on Starmer's dramatic U-turn regarding winter fuel payments. During the campaign, Labour pledged to protect this vital support system for pensioners. Once in power, they swiftly restricted eligibility, leaving millions of elderly Britons facing a cold winter without assistance they had counted on for years. As Gervais pointed out, these aren't faceless statistics. They're the same people who trusted Labour to protect them. The comedian's perspective resonates because it focuses on human consequences rather than political gamesmanship. While Starmer speaks of difficult decisions and economic necessities, Gervais speaks of elderly gardeners who helped build the country, now marching in protest against the very government they voted into power. The contrast couldn't be more stark. When you see 80-year-olds protesting in the rain because they can't afford to heat their homes, something has gone catastrophically wrong, Gervais noted in a podcast appearance last week. And Starmer's response? Basically telling them to stop making a fuss. It's like watching a tragedy disguised as governance. What's particularly striking about Gervais' political observations is how they highlight Starmer's apparent prioritisation of international relations over domestic crises. While British pensioners contemplate which room in their house they can afford to heat, the Prime Minister seems more focused on photo opportunities with foreign dignitaries than addressing the growing discontent at home. Gervais' most biting criticism emerged when he contrasted Starmer's approach to different policy areas. Funny how there's suddenly no money for pensioners who've paid into the system their entire lives, but unlimited resources for other priorities. He observed, the comedian didn't need to spell out the hypocrisy. His audience understood immediately. But it was Starmer's reaction to protesters that prompted Gervais' most scathing takedown. When confronted by elderly demonstrators during a recent public appearance, the Prime Minister hurried past, visibly irritated. Later, in a press conference, he dismissed their concerns as misunderstandings of necessary policy adjustments. Gervais' response was swift and devastating. When you can't look your voters in the eye, after breaking your promises, you've lost any right to their respect. This observation struck a chord because it exposed a fundamental disconnection between Starmer's government and the very people who put their trust in him. The betrayal isn't limited to pensioners. Gervais has also highlighted how young people and traditional Labour supporters are experiencing the same pattern of broken promises. Students who voted Labour based on pledges of educational reform now face uncertainty and rising costs. Working-class communities that formed Labour's historical backbone watch as their concerns are sidelined for what Starmer calls pragmatic governance. It's like watching someone promise you a 5-course meal, charge you for it, then serve you a mouldy sandwich while insisting you should be grateful. Gervais remarked, this ability to distill complex political betrayal into relatable analogies explains why his commentary resonates far beyond his usual audience. When a comedian becomes the nation's moral compass, you know we're in uncharted political waters. Gervais has managed to achieve what Starmer's opposition couldn't, exposing the gap between Labour's promises and their actions with devastating clarity. What's truly remarkable is how this unlikely alliance of Britain's oldest and youngest generations has emerged to challenge the status quo, united by their shared experience of betrayal. This isn't merely about policy disagreements, it's about the fundamental contract between voters and their elected officials. When politicians view protesters as inconveniences rather than constituents deserving of respect, democracy itself begins to erode. Starmer's approval ratings, now sitting at historic lows for a newly elected Prime Minister, tell the real story. The clock's ticking for Starmer. Caught between international pressures and domestic discontent, he faces a pivotal choice that will define his legacy. Will he course correct and acknowledge the legitimate grievances of British citizens, or continue down this path of dismissal and deflection?